So if you've never tuned into one of these sessions before, I am Stephanie Patel. I am telepathic with those heaven side, but I do use a pendulum and a letterboard as an aid. It helps because those heaven side participants can move the pendulum. They can spell out things, and it reassures me that things are accurate because they'll stop the pendulum immediately and let me know if I've got it wrong. And it also allows me to sit here and just be more relaxed and not have to worry about being focused or distractions or anything. So today, let's see if we have anybody who wants to talk first. Tobias has something to say. And what I want to say is that today is an awesome opportunity to clear the record on some issues that have been confusing humanity for a long, long time. The problem is that the stories that you hear have been poured through so many ears that they then come out a little skewed, sort of like a game of telephone, where you whisper in somebody's ear and then that person repeats it to the next person and the next. And by the time it comes back to you, it doesn't even sound at all like what you said to begin with, right? You're all familiar with that pattern. So we are going to discuss this from the point of view of the two primary participants in the story of the New Testament. So the first one I'd like to introduce to you is the one you know as Jesus, although he's had many lifetimes, and he's a friend of ours and a friend of Steph's and a friend of all of yours too. However, the story of the glory of his resurrection and all of that he's the only Son of God, is so skewed that it has caused so much pain and suffering in the world that it's time to correct the record. And hopefully, when you play the record from now on, you'll get a good song and not one that's all scratched up and all wrong. So here is Jesus to talk to you. Thank you, Tobias and Steph, for being here, because it's true, we are old friends. We all come from Nibiru, and we have had to play the game of blame and shame, like everybody else, since we reincarnated upon Earth. And the birth of the men and women that you know when you are here below are all the trust on the thrust of energy that came when the Anunnaki came to the earth and decided they needed to create their own servants, you see. So they created humanity to serve them. Today, I was listening to Steph, and she did say, hey, the one thing that I remember from my catechism that has always struck me as true was this. The question that was asked is, why did God create me? Because that's the way the catechism was set up, questions and answers. And the answers was that God created me to know him and to love him and to serve him in this world. And she said, well, I think that's very true, because that's how God energy gets to know itself, through its parts. And that's the nature of reality, is we love one another and we serve one another by being us. God is served by all his parts, right? Just like the body is served by all the cells of the body. And so that always struck me as true. However, the insertion of the Anunnaki DNA that created modern humanity left a lasting impression upon the human experience because, of course, the humans were created to serve the Anunnaki, and they were treated as slaves, you see. They had to do what the Anunnaki wanted them to, or the Anunnaki would blow them away or stick them down in a dark hole with the rats and whatever other vermin were down there until they cried for mercy and were willing to do what they asked them to. And so through the generations, there was a lot of fear of God because they were so confused that they thought the Anunnaki were gods who created them. And therefore, they hated them. Gods that created them hated them, and they hated the gods who created them. And therefore, there was a lot of confusion in the story. And that confusion did not confuse some of us who had come from Nibiru, because our soul energy was already pretty clear about the nature of reality and the nature of the God you see, because the God you see is everything you see all around you, right? So that we weren't confused. However, it was very, very difficult to diffuse the fear that the other humans experienced when they thought about the Anunnaki, and they lumped us together with the Anunnaki. Many of them did, because we looked different than them in those days, and we looked probably more like the Anunnaki to them because we were so tall and slender, and they really didn't have much to do with the Anunnaki. We stayed away and just used us to relay their directions and instructions to the rest of humanity. And so there wasn't a lot of opportunity for humanity to develop a trust on their own reality, which is that they are the nature of God energy. It is constantly being replicated. It's a fractal. You are the sole arbiter of all your experience, and yet you are also a material form that appears to be separate from those forms around you. And they all seem to be doing the same thing you're doing, which is to be living their lives in trust on finding food and shelter and a little bit of comfort and this and that and the other that made their lives feel fulfilled. And so it's a little bit confusing, but we've been over a lot of that already. How the dichotomies are the way that God created you. If God could not divide love into the lover and the beloved, then God could not know himself. And so there is always this tension between right and left, up and down, etc. But neither can exist without the other, you see? Therefore, they seem to pull apart, and at the same time, they seem to pull together. And it is that particular tension that allows you to have the experience you have in physical reality and to express yourself within that matrix. And so you could say experience and expression are two sides of the same coin. And you have to have both, because what you put into the world, others will receive, and what others put into the world, you will receive. And it all goes through the matrix like an ocean wave that comes back to you, or an echo that will return to your ears in a cavern. So this is how the story really got started, because there was so much fear of the Anunnaki and of the Elohim, who were those souls who had reincarnated from Nibiru and their intervening home, Mars. And there was so much hatred because of the pain and suffering that had been inflicted upon the early humans. There was so much hatred. And yet, they were aware the gods had the power over them. They could give them life and take it away. That's the way they saw it. And so they had to kowtow to the gods, and it became very confusing to them over time. So over time, many people were trusting on their ability to figure it out in their own way. And in different parts of the world, they did sort it out in a way that sort of helped them to get by the day and explain why the stars stayed up in the sky and the sun got up every day, and the moon would help provide a little bit of light in the night. And that was how the Jews came to be the people that they came to be, because they were trying to sort it out in their own way. There were lots of steps, you might say, along the way, because there were many cultures and many civilizations that rose and perished along the way. And there would be a new beginning, and there would be a sort of ending that would come to a particular civilization, and then another civilization would gradually rise. So it was like the ocean waves. It would come and it would pass. What remains, of course, is the world of God energy, which continues to funnel itself through its parts in order to always give and receive, give and receive, give and receive. And so from the ashes, the phoenix rises into a glorious new bird, you see, to fly away from the ashes of its former self. The various symbols of the resurrection, such as the caterpillar and the butterfly or the moth, are examples of how something new comes out of the death of something old. You see, it just gives way to the next thing. It just gives way to the next thing. There's really no gap. It's just a metamorphosis from one story to the next, you might say, one chapter to the next. And so through time, many of us have come to see that humanity cannot seem to escape the fear and the hatred that had come down to it from the time of the Anunnaki. And many have tried to help humanity let go of their fear and just be free to enjoy reality. Because there's nothing really to fear, because you're an eternal being and everything will be okay in the long run. This is one story in the vast repertoire of stories in the history of the universe. The story of humanity is one story because it's always replicating itself. You see, it's always creating new stories and new books from the same pattern, which can be as simple as the fact that you breathe in and you breathe out. That love is divided into the lover and the beloved. It's so simple in reality. However, it's so convoluted in the way that society came to see the structure of their world under the Anunnaki. And so, although you would rotate through heaven and earth, it still would come back to you when you were on earth, because the same stories would be revealed to you And they might change a little bit, but essentially they had the same problem at their core. And the core was the confusion between God, God energy, that which is you and everything, and the concept of the physicality that arose to be known as humanity through the insertion of the Anunnaki DNA. Now, for the Elohim, the Anunnaki DNA was not so foreign because they were all from Nibiru initially. So even the physical experience was less traumatic to them than to the other humans who essentially had come to be in their history through their development on this planet with the other plants and animals, because they were all a synergy, you see. They all grew up together. It all developed as one balanced entity, you might say. And so the insertion of the Anunnaki DNA created an anomaly, you might say. It created a situation where suddenly there seemed to be a gap between the development of the humanoids or hominids, sorry, that's my fault. The hominids who became the modern humans. Instead of developing in tandem with the rest of the natural world, they got a boost from outside the system, you might say. And that changed the way that they interacted with the world around them. And so all of these factors combined to create the tendency to think that the Anunnaki were the creator gods, and that even sometimes they would think that the Elohim were the creator gods, because the Elohim did work in the labs and they did deal with the DNA as well, because that was part of their jobs back in the day. And so all of this confusion became so endemic to the human population that it could not seem to be eradicated. The roots ran very, very deep. And in my time, although I was born into a family that trusted upon a certain amount of dogma, you might say, about the way that we needed to be in fear of God, I came to see through a variety of experiences that this was not true, and that God is in everyone and everywhere and everything. That God is you, and God is everything you do, and God is everything you see, and God is the great being of the universe. It's always changing, and therefore it's always in a state of being and never in a state of been, because it's always there. It's not a physicality, you see, in this way that we think about physicality. It is a state reality, and it's part of the dichotomy that allows us to have experience and to be able to express together. So there are different sides of this equation, you might say, that all need to be taken into account. And so it's like saying that you go to a movie, and the movie needs to be consistent. It needs to hang together. There's a story there. But when you come out of the movie theater, you're in a different reality, you see? So there are many stories in God's library, and this is one of them. And so in my day, I wanted to help people understand that God was not something they needed to fear. If you fear God, you fear yourself. God was something that was just the way it was, and just relax and love each other, and everything would be okay. And that was the way that I came at it. And in my day, I wandered around and I would say to people, hey, I have something to say. And they would say, well, we're not too busy today. I guess we can listen. And little by little, the pieces started to come together in their own way, because although this is not my story alone, because it involves many people, but it also is a story that has been replicated throughout history. There have been many people who wandered around trying to share with others the message they had to share. And so time passed, and because of the particular points of view of the inhabitants of that particular era, they began to feel slighted. They began to feel that I was a threat to their position in the world, primarily in the hierarchy of the world. And they began to say, well, you can't say that. You can't do that. Because if you say that and you do that, then it doesn't fit with our agenda. You're supposed to bow down to us and say to us, Almighty ones, thank you for telling me how to wear my hair. And so they began to whisper behind their hands and do the kinds of things that people do when they want to get rid of you, but they don't want to come right out and say it, because if they do, then people might say, well, you're the villain. They don't want to be the villain. And so they just whisper behind their hands. And why don't they want to be the villain? Why is anybody afraid of being the villain? Because of this old story of the hoary old men, from the hoary old men, that the Anunnaki would tell you what to do. And if you didn't do it the way they told you to, then they'd have to punish you and maybe even kill you. And so that became the theme. You see, that if you're the villain, you're the one that is not doing what the Anunnaki told you to do. And so they got to kill you, and they got to throw you in the hole with the rats until you confess that they have all the power and you don't have any. And so they began to do what people do. It's not unusual. World War II was the result of a lot of people whispering behind their hands, you see. And so all of them are as implicated in the slaughter that would follow, because they didn't want to be seen as the villain, but they just gossip in their corners and whisper and look for someone to punish, because they didn't want to be the villains, you see. So if you could find a villain out there, then you can be the good one, because the Anunnaki would say, well, we'll just take the worst of you. Kind of like the story of you don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun the one you're with. And so people would turn against their neighbors whenever it seemed to be a way to save their own skin or their own trust on being better than others, which is another way of saying to save your own skin. If you can amass enough fortune, enough fame, enough power, then you feel a little bit safer. You may not be happy because you'll figure out that it doesn't really work that way, but that's the story. The more power you have, the more money, the more gold, the more you can command others, and they'll have to do what you tell them to. And so it makes you feel a little bit safer, because you've forgotten something very important. And what you've forgotten is that you're God, you see. And if you have to be better than God, then that's a trap. That's kind of hard to get out of, because you just go round and round. Because if you got to be better than God, somebody's got to be worse than God. And so you keep trying to stay on top, but the nature of the wheel is that it turns, you see. And sometimes you'll be on the part that goes through the mud, and sometimes you'll be the part that the sun shines upon. And so you have to be on that wheel because you're God, you see. And God created the wheel. God created the trust on, up and down, right and left, the lover and the beloved. You're going to be the lover, then the wheel's going to go around and you're going to be the beloved. And that's not a bad story right there. To be the lover and the beloved all the time, going round and round. However, if you're going to be the God that decides who's good and who's evil, then that wheel got to go around. And you will have to be the one that gets ground to dust because somebody else got to say if you were good or evil. You see, you will receive what you give. That's the nature of reality. It's just the wheel that goes around and around. You're bound to the wheel, whether you want to think of it as the tree of life that will grow and grow, or if you want to think of it as the wheel of karma, doesn't matter because it's a wheel. The difference is that you might get kind of tired of being ground to dust on the wheel of karma. And you might say, well, if I have a choice, since I'm God, I'd rather be on the wheel of the lover and the beloved. And so you get a choice because you're God and you get to decide. I don't mean to say that you are the God that controls all of reality. That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is that if you think you're the God that gets to decide for your fellows, then you're sitting in the chair, the seat of the one who condemns yourself. Because it's all part of you, you see? Everything you see, everything you feel, everything you experience is part of you. So just give it up and be happy. Because do you really have any choice when you figure it out than to just relax and say, hey, I want to be happy? Because there's something about being happy that is so delightful to God energy that it likes it, you see? It says, I like it. I like it a lot. I like it when there's peace and harmony because I feel happy. I don't have to be lazy. I don't have to have other people fan me to keep heat away. I don't have to have somebody else prepare my mocha in the morning. I can do it myself and I can make one for them. Or I could reach out and fan them. Why not? Because when you just do what you do and say what you say, then everything changes, you see. It changes anyway, because you're always doing what you do and saying what you say. But when you're trying to control the result of what you say and do, then you're trying to get off the wheel and ride in the coach. And that would be okay, except you see, that's just another wheel of reality. Because when you are riding high and mighty, that means somebody has to be playing the other parts. And that means that will be you, you see. And so do it the way it appeals to you. Do it the way that appeals to you. And that is my message. Wear your hair the way you want to wear your hair. And if you wear your hair the way everybody else tells you to wear your hair, then that must be the way you want to wear it. And so do it that way. And if you get ground to dust enough times, maybe you'll say, I don't want to wear my hair this way. I want to do it a different way. Because you can always change, you see, because the nature of God energy is it's constantly learning, it's constantly changing, it's constantly experiencing a new point of view. Because the new point of view is you. Now, I will pause and give you an opportunity to ask me questions.
What are some of the most misquoted teachings of Jesus, please?
Not necessarily misquoted, misunderstood. So, for example, the admonition to love your neighbor as yourself is really a observation, and it means that you will always love another as you love yourself. If you don't love yourself, how are you going to love another? Because it's all God energy. It can work the other way. If you love another, then so you will love yourself. That would be something that I think is misunderstood. That people would say to another, well, you must love another as yourself. And people think, well, that means I must love them as much as I love my ego. And that's not the answer. I must love them as much as I love my fear. The answer is that all I have to do is look and say, how much do I love my neighbor? And then I'll know how much I love myself. See? Does that make sense to you?
Did Jesus have a soulmate during his life? And is that soulmate heaven side or here? Or does he have any comment?
No comment on that.
Okay.
The concept of a twin soul has been gone into many times through the story of Steph and Steve and others. And so, of course, I have another side to my energy as well. However, it's not something that others need to know about. It's only something you need to know about. So, the one that comes to you and you say to yourself, well, there's something about this that's a little different than everything else. This might be a clue. But just like we can't tell you who you are and your story because your story is personal to you, so that relationship is personal to you. And Steph and Steve tell their story so that others can understand that they too have a story and that they too can trust upon it. If somebody had come to Steph and said, well, your twin soul is Steve Jobs, she would have laughed in their face. She would have said, oh my God, are you telling me that I am that depraved? And so I guess that goes back to what I was saying before. How you love the other is how much you love yourself. See? Of course, once they got together, then they loved each other because they were seeing each other through their own eyes and not through the eyes of someone else. You see? So if I told you who was special to me in that particular way, then you would be seeing it through your eyes and not mine, you see. All right, any other questions?
Is there anything that we can do for experiencing more unconditional love in the world for humanity, besides loving ourselves?
Give up. Give up. Give up. Give up the battle. There's no battle, no war, nothing you need to do. And once you accept that to the depth of your being, then you will be free and you will be able to see reality. And that's the way that I tried to say in my lifetime. Give it up, people. Surrender to reality and just live in harmony, because even if they come after you with their pitchforks, it doesn't mean that you have to fight them, you see. You just have to say, hey, I see you, I love you, and not a problem for me because I'm not my body, you see. Other questions?
The churches, the religions has used you 2000 years to get the power over people. Is it possible to reveal all the lies so people can actually start to look at what is true?
Of course. It is possible to reveal the lies that meet your eyes. And so you just say, hey, I don't see it that way. So you're telling me this or that is true, but I don't see it. So help me to see it through your eyes. So then you begin to talk to each other and you begin to listen to each other. And when you sit in the church and the one standing up there exhorting you to take care lest you fall into the grasp of the devil, you stand up and say, hey, I never saw the devil. Could you explain that some more to me? Don't sit there like dumb sheep. Stand up and say, hey, I don't see it that way. Could you explain that more? Could you explain how you came to the conclusion that there is something called a devil? Where is it? What is it? Why is it? How is it? How many of you would dare to stand up in church and ask that question? One, two. Well, pretty soon we'll get a whole congregation and they'll all be there for that one who comes to their feet and says, I don't get it. Please explain that to me. And the one at the front will say, you need to sit down, or somebody will say, hush. And everybody else will rise up as one and they would say, give them their day. Give them their opportunity to have their say. You don't own us. You don't control us. You're not our boss. You're not the boss of me. You see? So, Sissel, do you have a particular lie in mind that you would like to talk about?
It is about the devil and that we are born in sin. So what you're saying is that we actually should you start to mingle between the people more that are in these belief systems.
What I'm saying is that one by one, you open your eyes and you greet the sunrise and you say, the sun is shining today, and I'd rather sit out here with the birds and the bees than in some church where they are preaching to me. That's all you have to do, because the lies, as you call them, only lie where you let them fall. And if you don't pick them up and repeat them, then they have no wings, you see. One by one, you come back to reality, one by one.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Will Jesus come back to earth? Will he incarnate again?
I already have many times.
Now?
Now,
Mhm.
why do you ask that question?
Well, there is a lot of evidence that we have a new time arriving, and more people are opening up their hearts and for the light and for love. So
if all those people are opening up their hearts, why is it necessary for me to come back into this reality?
I don't know, I just wanted to ask.
Well, they wouldn't even know me, because I'd have another identity. But you see, the one you put on the cross is the effigy of me. So stop crucifying the ones who stand up in church and say, I don't get it. Where's this devil you're talking about? Don't crucify them. Listen to them, because they're already among you. However, when you give away your power to anyone, whether it's to the one you think is Jesus or anyone, then you steal my power, you see. You keep me chained up. And you use my name for every atrocity that you can think of. And you say, well, we're followers of Jesus. And I say, well, don't follow me, please. Because I just want to be free to live in peace and harmony with my brothers and sisters and the ones I love. Does that make sense to you?
Mhm.
This is Polly. I was just thinking the other day, when I moved away at the age of 21 and then came back in my 40s to my hometown, nobody knew me. I knew them because I could recognize their faces, their vocal expressions, and I was looking for them because I was coming back. So, but nobody knew me, which was a very interesting experience. And it reminded me of when Jesus says, you know, a prophet's not accepted in his hometown. Because when he came back to his hometown, they just wanted to kill him, just wanted to crucify him. So the Jesus is reborn in each of us. That's the resurrection. That's the coming back. And it feels, I had to, you know, have my red letter Bible because it was the words of Jesus. And when I was a kid, I used to pray always in the name of Jesus. And I used to say, use the blood of Jesus because it had power and all of that, not realizing how we are the embodiment of God. And so I was like fervent, like was like one of those monks kneeling on the floor, pleading with Jesus to listen to me. And, he was with us all the time, and we didn't have to work so hard to see him. So I just wanted to say that I know that they wouldn't recognize Jesus if he came back again. He wouldn't be the same person, or the one that he wouldn't look like the Jesus they want him to look like. They want him to be like, the Messiah who comes with power and with a sword, and this we should be afraid of, rather than the Jesus who was, came because he loved us. It's just an
Yeah.
observation.
Sure. Well, it's the same old story repeating itself, right? Because the idea of taking my story and twisting it the way that it was twisted in order to justify the crimes that are committed against the name of sanity and humanity, which is to say, to play the same old game of trying to get somebody to serve you and trying to suck up to them so that they'll treat you a certain way, is what they did with the name of the people who actually did understand my message. There were lots of people in the early days after my death who understood my message, but they could not parlay their energy into enough trust on redeeming this world into a place of peace and harmony, because there was so much dark energy and so many people were unable to give up their trust on the fear of the Creator God or gods, that they turned against the Christians and they burned them and they beheaded them, and they did whatever they needed to do to put so much fear in the hearts of everyone else that they didn't want to go near anybody who claimed to be a Christian. And they then took the name and slapped it on their own game, if that makes sense to you. And they said, if you don't do what we tell you to, you're going to go to hell. And if you don't let us baptize you, you're going to go to hell. And if you don't put money in our collection plate, then you're not a good Christian, and we'll excommunicate you, etc., etc. It went on through the ages. So the pages of this story are covered in blood. And it's not my blood. It's the bleeding heart of humanity who says, please set us free, set us free, set us free. But they can't set themselves free because they think somebody else has enslaved them. Nobody else has enslaved them, but they've enslaved themselves, you see? And so they just took advantage of the opportunity to use my name and play the game of blame and shame. So if anybody here still thinks I'm the only son of God, raise your hand. I was a man on earth, just like you are a woman on earth, and just like everybody else who comes to this world to play the game of humanity. I had no special powers other than an occasional breakthrough ability that is simply the power of your trust on God energy. And so I was listening to Steph tell her stories the other day, and I said, well, those were unusual events that people could say were miracles. However, she just says, well, that's just the way it was. Because you see, once you get in touch with your true humanity and your true God nature, it's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. You heal. You heal yourself. You walk on hot coals. You get in touch with your own sacred nature. And you come to me and you say, hey, Jesus, how are you doing today? And I say, well, I'm fine. How are you, Steph? And she says, I'm good. I feel kind of sad and kind of bad when I hear the way people talk about you. And I just wanted you to know that you have a friend in Steph. And I said, thank you, Stephanie, for being there for me. Because it's not very often somebody says to me, find a friend in John or Joan or Betty or Samuel. Not very many people say to me, you can find a friend in me. They all want me to be their friend, but they won't bend a knee to reality. They won't give in, you see. They won't give up their trust that they're so special that I have to bend a knee to them. And I'm not going to do that. So I know that you have other questions, so I'm here to answer them.
How come it seems so important for Christianity to keep Jesus on the cross everywhere?